Question came in today that I think we could all take a moment to just reflect on and get a sense of where we at in this as far as our emotions, as far as how we're thinking. And that has to do with a lot of the weather and a lot of stuff that is going on around the world when it comes to tragedy, when it comes to tornadoes, when it comes to earthquakes, it comes to hurricanes, it comes to the effect of the season. Somebody wrote a question, they're spinning and obsessing about climate change. And I'm actually going to dive into that and kind of talk a little bit about how our perspectives can get formed and just teaching us to be sober and how we see things. So let me talk about hurricane news and highly sensitive people. Can we do that? How many of you are highly sensitive people? That's a term that has been coined to describe people that have a high degree of sensitivity. Your nervous system tends to just pick up on things a little bit more than the average bear. And so you tend to feel what other people are feeling, but sometimes you feel it too much. You tend to anticipate things too much. And that can move into hypersensitivity very easily. So it's one thing to be sensitive, which I've been my whole life. It's another thing to be hypersensitive. When you're hypersensitive, then what happens is fear, anxiety, worry, obsessiveness can start to take over, and now it hijacks something that's very beautiful. Having a sensitivity, whether you're male or female, having a sensitivity can be a great thing. It makes you empathetic. It makes you somebody who is very helpful. People who are HSPs are usually the people many people go to, right? To share, to confess, to ask for help or support. So that sensitivity makes you a very, very strong vessel, potentially. But fear can get in the way and to hijack that. So somebody who's in our Healing and Freedom community wrote in a question about, okay, how do I deal with sensitivity, hypersensitivity when it comes to watching the news or clicking on news links, especially with the recent news of the hurricane that came right up through, hit Florida, but then it just picked up speed, went through Georgia, then hit North Carolina in a way that it has really never been hit before. And people's lives are devastated. Many of you have seen clips of it, and I continue to see in my feeds the way that this has impacted people. And so I think many of you, whether you consider yourself highly sensitive or not, what I can share here in feedback, I think could benefit and help us all. So it says, Mark, could you please speak on navigating news of the hurricane devastation for those of us with sensitive or hypersensitive heart? Stories of crime and tragedy imprint permanently on my heart. I never forget snippets. Now, I want to take that word permanently because that's an intense stamp that says this thing is going to affect you permanently. So the way something affects you emotionally doesn't have to be permanent. That this thing is going to affect you in the same way forever. Now, certain moments in our life affect us emotionally, and it's a good thing, providing it sobers us up, right? So I'm going to talk about sobriety because there's two ditches people fall into. Sobriety is the place the Bible speaks about as far as mental health, of where God's word teaches us to live in. Be ye sober. Be sober. Sobriety is I'm awake, I'm alert, I see things for how they are. I don't see them worse than they are. And that's where many fall into. We get catastrophic in our thinking, in our lives. And when you get catastrophic, you lose sobriety. And now it's very difficult to even be a help or to be a blessing. Because when things happen to other people, we want to be sober because then our senses can be aware of compassion. How can I be a help? How can I pray? Is there something I can do, right? So there's the ditch of catastrophic thinking where we spin out. Then there's the other ditch, which is more denial. There's some people that don't want to know the news. They don't want to hear about anything. And they close themselves out from it. I don't want to know nothing. I just want to go live on a mountain, live by myself, and not hear about anything. Understood. I get it. I get both sides. And for many of you, you probably bounce back and forth between the two, right? And so you kind of have to find where do you tend to find yourself. Now, most people visiting this channel and watching these materials, you probably tend to lean more in the avenue where you can get catastrophic. Fear starts to take over and you start to obsess, you start to spin out, and you lose your sobriety. See, we don't think of it that way, do we? We don't think of we think of sobriety as just you don't get drunk. We don't think of sobriety as our emotional bandwidth of what we're taking in and how we're taking it in. So there's something that happens where news is delivered to you, but it's usually delivered in a package. News is not given to you in a just straight factual way. It's rarely, news has rarely ever been delivered that way. So those of you that think there's a bias in the media, and you see the bias, rather, it's not that you think, you see it. That's been there since forever. And whenever news has been distributed, there's always an angle. There's a package given. Why? Because the package gets you to pay attention. And one of the main packages is fear. That news gets packaged in. Why? Because people will pay attention to fear. If you just get straight news, here's what happened, here's what it is, here's what it is, here's what it is, there's usually an angle that needs to be happen. There's some things that are amplified. There's some things that are suppressed based on the message that wants to be delivered. So we have to be discerning when the fear factor is being shot our way to get our attention, because we can get addicted to the dopamine rush of being anxious, being disturbed, getting angry, right? And what it does to us, because that's the intent. It gets that reaction out of you, and now stuff gets you moving. Now your emotions can be manipulated into a certain direction. So we just have to be aware of sobriety being taken from us, where we are now so emotional we lose our sense of self-control. So we can see, we can pray, we can keep our senses about us, because as believers, God wants us to be the sober vessels of help, that when they ask for the hope that lies within you, you're ready to give an answer. Well, for a lot of believers, no one's asking because we're just as worried as they are, and we're struggling in all the same ways they are. Okay, so I set that up to now get into the question. You say, I never forget snippets. I encounter of horrifying acts or events. They continue to disturb me years down the road, popping into my brain like intrusive thoughts and causing me to feel horror and anguish again. So that's what that's meaning is, if you have memories of watching the news or things that have happened, it's one thing if it's traumatic, something that you actually witnessed or something that actually happened to you. Now that's in the category of trauma. And that's something that trauma needs certain aspects of tending to work through it. Right? But memories of past things that are still kind of traveling with you in the present means a couple things. Number one, what's your interpreter? And if fear is your interpreter, it's going to keep the darkness, it's going to keep the sense of doom and gloom traveling, and it's going to keep picking up on present things. And so how many of you have so many things from your life you process through fear, and so what did it tell you? I'm not safe, I'm not protected, I'm alone. Right, which is very similar to what trauma feels like. I'm not equating listening to the news as with trauma, but there's similar understanding, similar messaging that we need to be aware of. And so this is then setting you up for when you watch the news, it's triggering that fear-based response. And what fear says about the news, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. And then what it does is it starts to expand the world and be aware of generalities that take over your thinking. Where you go, the world is not safe. Nothing. You start having sweeping statements that go across everything. All Christians are hypocrites. All men are this. All women are this. Or all churches are this. The sweeping statements tell us the conditioning of our hurt and pain that we're now sweeping onto other people and sweeping across a bunch of areas. Okay, so there's this thing that gets triggered when you read the news of this fear, but here's the addictive factor. Yeah, I still struggle not to click on news or topics I know will disturb me. I'm finally realizing this habit is anti-loving and disregards the impact of such content on me. Honestly, I'm often unaware of how deeply anything affects me. Many times, though, disturbing news like the current hurricane is impossible to avoid completely. Okay, so the solution is not a black or white solution. It's not watch the news all day. It's not don't watch it at all. So we are learning in the new age of information how to balance out the diet of what we're taking in. because I think it's good to be aware of what's going on. I find many people that I talk to are not aware of what's going on from a basic level. Furthermore, they're not aware of what's going on, if you know what I mean. It's like what's happening and what's really happening. And many people, out of fear, they don't want to know what's happening. They don't want to know what's going on. So it's not obsessing over it. It's also not never watching. And you have to learn, you have to learn how to not make fear your master filter, where it's the interpreter in things. You're not safe. The world's coming to an end. Things are so bad. Things are so bad. Beware of that, because it takes you off your place. And now, some of us in our journey, certain things you're a little weaker to, maybe because it hits close to home, right? There's certain subjects in the news I don't spend a lot of time watching. For example, I know a lot of people can be fascinated about maybe these family breakdown stories or crime stories or things about, abuse and criminal activity and stuff like that. Some of that, it's I don't really get into that, because I listen to a lot of that all day, and people I meet with and the stuff I process through. So I have a different bandwidth of stuff that I'm listening to. But be aware where fear becomes your interpreter, because that's gonna take you out of your place of sobriety. And it's what I believe to be at the top of the list of what Satan wants to do in the lives of people, is cripple them with fear. And going back to the early 2000s, I was preaching over and over and over and over again to telling other believers, you need to be prepared for the future. I wasn't trying to predict the future. It was none of that. I said, you need to be prepared for the future, because fear is going to increase. And so how do you prepare for the future and future fears? Deal with your fears now. Deal with the stuff that is causing you to live in fear. Your financial fears, you're ruminating, your worries and stuff like that. And many in the church were just kind of asleep, whatever, they're like, as long as my bank account's okay, I'm fine. And so you see the rising work of fear, where people haven't been equipped to deal with the fear factor. And so the enemy all day long is wanting to accuse you and make you afraid. Accuse you, make you afraid. Accuse you, make you afraid. And the majority of problems and questions that come some form of sense of accusation and fear that's coming against you. So you say many times, hearing details of the hurricane causes me to dissociate, panic, cry, or feel immense anger and pain, which is comforting in a way, because it shows I still have compassion in my emotionally saturated heart. I often struggle with a level of numbness or compassion fatigue, not because I don't care, but because I'm overwhelmed with being emotionally pulled on too much from too many sources, including myself. So here's the feedback I want to give those of you that are in the hypersensitive area. Because hypersensitivity is there, it's like your nervous system has gotten hijacked. And what it reveals is a need for emotional equipping. I was not emotionally equipped to handle the sensitivity that I felt. It was the only feedback I think I got was, Mark, you're too sensitive. I almost went into my mother's voice there. Oh, Mark, you feel too much.
You just feeling way too much. I'm gonna tell you something, son. Those nerve endings, you gotta settle down there, boy, before I slap you with my King James Bible.
That's about it. Wasn't a whole lot of equipping there. What does it mean, equipping a sensitivity? You see something. I want to encourage you guys, practice in your life. Now, I'm not encouraging you to binge news. Have your time of taking in the news and practice. What does it look like to see this soberly? So something hits you and makes you want to spin out and get hyper emotional. Just gently, just pull yourself back and go, it's okay. It's okay. No, I don't have to go that far. Bring it back in. What are you feeling? This is what I'm feeling. Okay. And keep allowing yourself to move forward. Beware, folks, of where everyday news and things prevents your movement forward in life. prevents you from taking the steps forward that you need to take in your journey. Okay. I want to learn how to be a wise steward of my sensitivity, neither plugging my ears and lying, nor being emotionally taken out. So this is done through practice. You have to practice this. There's going to be days where you go, oh, I'm taking it in too much. Back it up, throttle it down. Then there's like, you find yourself going, I just don't want to hear anything. I want to just go into a cave and I want to check out. Many Americans right now, we got an election coming up. We got all kinds of issues coming up. Many Christians I speak with have a sense of despair they're struggling with. They're grieving over their country. There's a lot of emotions we're processing through. My recommendation to you is not, hey, get over it. God's in control. I don't want to negate that emotional capacity that we have as believers, as humans, to feel. There's anger you may feel. There's fear. There's a sense of uncertainty of what's happening. It's okay. It's what we do as those emotions flow through us. Are we learning how to work through them and calibrate ourselves back to a place of sobriety? Because when you land in sobriety, you can start to see, is this something that it'd be helpful for me to pray about? Not this compulsive, oh, I got to pray. There's something I can pray about. 2 is there's something I can do. Some of you are like, I want to give. I can't go there. You don't live in the area. We've even thought about, is there ways we could, maybe volunteer and join? I know Melissa's been looking into that, to help. Churches in the area are talking about sending teams out. We're like, okay, is there something in that we can help you a part of? When you're sober, you can think about those things. When you're in denial, you're just blocking it out. You don't want to know, so you can't connect to that compassionate response. When you're spinning, you also can't do it. You're not sober either, because then you're in your drowning, not aware of what's going on around you. And so I want to remain in awareness. I've had a lot of emotions in these past couple of weeks, even with the North Carolina thing. Frustration of how just me, my personal perspective, how the government's been handling it, the government response and things, and people who've actually trying to go in and helping, and what's really been happening. It's an incredibly frustrating thing. But I do know I have an ability to pray. I do know I have ability to give. I do have the ability to be supportive of anyone I know who is doing any work. I mean, I wanted to grab my chainsaws and just start going through those neighborhoods. I love cutting down trees. And I'm like, get me in there, But God, keep us sober during this time. So where do you find yourself in reaction to the news spinning out? Let God help you calibrate it back to sobriety land. Let faith, hope, and love ground you today. God, you're with us. You're here with us. Is there something I can do? Now, one of the downsides to our modern information age is you can feel this pull to have to feel something about everything. And I want you to know that your human heart is not designed to be able to have this empathetic pull towards every issue that's in the news headlines. But the way it's communicated is like, you need to feel a certain way, you need to feel this way, and you need to have an opinion, you need to have this. Our heart was only meant to handle so much. That's why, God has to work with us on boundaries and learning to rest and learning to get away from the crowd, learning to take our phones and put them away and just be still and just do nothing and not ruminate over what's happening or what's going on. And so keep that in mind, because what he's called us to do is love your neighbor. And so that means the proximity to who's around you. That's the focal point of where you give out. We get overwhelmed that there's these tragedies happening in states or countries, then we kind of default to nothing. My encouragement is, in the heart that you feel about other issues happening around the world, look at your family, look at your friends, look at the people around you, and go, what's a way that I can be loving in a meaningful way to my circle? Because that's all God has called you to do, is to love your neighbor as yourself. So that's some feedback there.